Welcome to JonGetsGames. Today I'll be reviewing Signorie. This 2 to 4 player game puts you at the head of an Italian household a few hundred years ago, and you're trying to make your house the most powerful. And you're going to do that by sending your kids off to war, into the church, and to marry off into other alliances with families. So mechanically what you're going to be doing here is a dice pool draft where a bunch of dice are rolled every single turn, and then all players will be grabbing one on their turn until the pool diminishes down and everybody's done with the things they want to do. First, I will show you how the game plays, and then I'll jump into my review. Here we have the starting setup for a 3-player game of Signorie. Each player gets their own player board as well as some women and men figures in their family, and there is a central board here which contains the dice which we'll be rolling in just a minute, some towns that we can be influencing through marriage or other political acts, and lastly a turn counter with some bonus actions. At the beginning of the round, all these dice get rolled, and there are always 1 die per player in each color, so if this is a 2-player game, there will only be 2 in each, and a 4-player game would obviously have 4. The structure of return is really quite simple. All you do is choose any one of these dice and put it onto your player board. So, for instance, a player might take this 4 right here. You then place the die down in the appropriate column to the color of the die, and it's important to note you're never allowed to have 2 dice of the same color within a given round, so once I take 1 yellow, I'm not going to be able to take any more. Now let's look at the numbers printed on the board, and this is a threshold that lets us see if we need to spend florins in order to place this die down. The way it works is you look at the value on the board and the value of the die you just placed. If the die is less than that number, then you have to pay the difference in florins. So obviously, the 1 for the yellow die, you will never have to pay florins in order to place here because no dice go less than 1. However, if instead we had grabbed this purple 2, then we see that it is 1 below 3, so we'd have to pay the difference in florins and discard this to the bank in order to use this die. Let's go back to our yellow 4 to show how a turn actually resolves. We notice there are these 3 different icons in each of the top boxes along your player board. When you play a die down, you're then going to choose one of these 3 options. Now, at first, you'll see along the top that these are all the same with just slightly different colors. These icons are associated with the 10 assignment tiles that are randomly distributed at the beginning of each round. What these let you do is spend your female or male family members that you have in your personal supply in order to do various things. For instance, right here, you could spend 3 of your female family members in order to get 3 female or male members into your stock. So you can essentially turn women into men. This one would let you spend up to 3 of your males in order to get 2 florins for each one that you spend. Over here, we could spend 2 females in order to marry off a 3rd one. So there are a variety of options that you can do. The next potential action that you can do for placing this die is to hire a helper. And you'll notice again, across all of these, there is this helper spot, but the colors are slightly different in the ring underneath. Now what this means is for a yellow die action, we can hire a teal helper. And if we look over here, we see these 3 teal discs down here. In order to actually hire the helper, we need to spend florins equal to the number that is on the spot that we want to cover up. For instance, if we wanted to put a helper right here, that would cost us 3 of our florins from our supply. But what this now means is that every time we take any teal action, whether it be the assignment action, the helper action, or the different actions along the bottom, you will also get 3 victory points. And let's show one other example. Let's say we had hired this helper on a previous round by this red action here. Then that means every time we take a yellow action for the rest of the game, we're going to get 1 to 6 initiative based on the pip value of the yellow die that we activated. So with this activation of a 4, we would get 4 initiative. So as you can see, by hiring this helper down here, as well as these 3, which behave very similarly, you're going to be incentivized to take higher pip value picks in order to get a bigger bang for that helper buck. And lastly, each of these columns has a 3rd action option, which is quite different from the others. So let's go over those briefly now. The yellow one is really simple. You just get 3 florins. And again, you're going to choose one of these 3 things when you place this die down, not all of them, but you'll always evaluate all helpers that are underneath that column. For the red special action, we will get to arrange a marriage with one of the female members of our family. We do this by choosing one of the cities and then placing the woman in the lowest value slot in that given city. Now we have to spend florins equal to the value of that slot, but then we get victory points equal to twice the number of florins that we just spent as a dowry. And lastly, we grab the tile that is in the woman slot on this specific city, and we're going to get to place this into our area. This tile gets placed into the marriage row on the right-hand side of your player board, and this signifies your family joining in with this family that has this coat of arms. It's important to note you're never allowed to have 2 of the same type of coat of arms in your given marriage row, and you'll notice that down here, this shows you can have 1 of each of the 6 coats. So now we have the purple action, which is simply to have offspring. What we're going to do is roll these white d6s equal to the number of I guess matriarchs we have in the family. At the beginning, this is us right here, and we have a wife. But as the game goes on, we might have more in our family because our sons get married. So let's say we had 3 of these. Well, then we would roll 3 of these dice. And then what you do is you look at the pip values on them. And if it's a 1, 2, or 3, then you'll gain another woman in your family. And if it's a 4, 5, or 6, you get a man. So in this case, we would actually generate 3 men. And they'd simply be added into our supply. Before I show you this gray action, let's look at the teal one. This lets you bump up any of these 4 tracks up to 4 times. And this process uses the male offspring in our extended family. So the way this works is if you have nobody on the board at all, you can spend a point to add one of them to either of these 3 tracks. This one being nobility, then we have a religious track, and finally warfare. You could also spend these points for the teal action on your initiative track, which is right here, which I talked a little bit about earlier. I could just spend all 4 points going 1, 2, 3, 4 and add nobody to these tracks if I wanted to, or I could do one initiative track here. I could add 1 person here and then add another person and jump them up twice, because that's also a way to use 4. And we could also just add all 4 of our people directly onto the track. Now, the way these tracks work is the higher you go on these tracks, you're going to start getting some benefits. For instance, if this guy right here goes 1, 2, 3, 4, then you'll immediately get 2 florins. And if it ever makes it up to this spot, you'll immediately get an extra initiative. A more important thing is these little numbers that are along the side. This shows you the level of skill, I guess, that this person has. This being 1, 2, 3, and 4, and this will come into play when I show you the last example. So let's just pretend I did that and got 2 florins. Finally, let's cover this gray slot, which involves sending a family member on a diplomatic mission. This action is quite similar to marriage, except in this case, we're taking one of our figures off of these tracks and we're going to add it to one of the cities. Now, the location of the figure is important because this one right here is a level 2, not quite level 3. And what that means is we could not put this figure down into this city because all of the 1s or 2s are filled and it didn't quite get to rank 3. It's not quite, I don't know, smart enough in the clergy. So that does give us these 2 options over here. If we went to this city, we'd have to go to the lowest value, or this city, again, to the lowest value. And what happens once we go into one of these 2 cities is we look up here and we see that we're not only going to take the tile that is associated with the right-hand diplomacy side, but we're also going to score victory points equal to the value of the spot that we pulled that person off of, which was a 4, so this would be a 4-point grab. We then sort the tile into the correct row. This was a clergy-based diplomatic mission, so it goes up here, and we're allowed to do this because we see the symbol on our player board. Now, for everyone's marriage slot, it's 1 of each, but these top 3 spots are different for each of the player boards. We're looking for different sets of these coat of arms, and just like the marriage slot, you're not allowed to place a crest over here that does not match one that's on your player board, but you're still allowed to take the diplomatic mission. You would just leave the tile on the board if it didn't match up with what you were looking for. At this point, let's discuss how we actually get points out of these tiles. Now, there are victory points on the tiles themselves. However, you get no points in a given row unless you have at least 3 tiles in that row. Now, that is going to incentivize you to get the correct tiles, but through various means, you will be able to get these kind of neutral tiles that are just 1 point each on the back. So that means at the end of the game, right here, we would get 4 points for this row here, but if we never got any more marriages, this 2 points would be lost. We would not be able to score it because we don't have at least 3 tiles. Players will continue to take turns going around the table, grabbing 1 die per turn until everybody passes. We now look to the initiative track and we see that the yellow player is going to score 4 victory points for getting this high, the blue player will get 2 points, and purple player will get none. Once we score those points, we will modify the turn order to the new initiative track, so yellow will actually go first, blue will go second, purple will go third, and finally all of these collapse down and we reset the initiative for the next turn. And now players check to see if they get a reward at the end of their turn, and this is based off of the number of pips that they've taken throughout the turn. We look up here and we see that the number is 13, and that means if you add up all the pips on these dice and you hit 13 or less, in this case we have 13 exactly, then we're going to get a reward. We're either going to get 3 florins, or we could take the reward associated with the tile that is associated with this current turn. So the first turn of the game, it would be this, 3 initiative for the next round. In subsequent rounds, we'll flip these over, so if we were on the 4th turn of the game, we would be evaluating this one over here. In addition to taking the money or the bonus tile, you could also arrange a marriage with one of your sons. This is how you get more of these white meeples here to roll more dice for your offspring, and as the game goes on, you'll also get a dowry of multiple florins. It's worth noting that in the 6th and 7th round of the game, instead of getting more of these tokens, you can instead spend 5 florins to get 5 victory points immediately, and these 2 are randomly associated tiles, as are all of these, but these are specific to getting you points based off of your placement on the cities on the board. Once 7 full turns have been played, the game is over. We'll then pull all of the people back from this track, and you're going to get victory points equal to half the value that they were at, and then you add in all the points you got for these family seals down here, put it onto the track. Whoever has the most points is going to be the winner. Before going into the review, I'd like to briefly point out these 3 variants that come officially in the game. The first says Open Gates, and this allows you to activate diplomatic or marriage actions in cities that are completely full. Under the normal rules, you can't do anything with the city once it's full, but this lets you go there, get the points for it, even though you won't be able to get a tile. The second variant actually says you play 6 turns instead of 7. You just don't even do this first turn of the game, so the game is an entire turn shorter. And the last one is Private Messages, which says whenever you activate one of these assignments, you actually flip it over so that for the rest of that round, no other players are going to be able to evaluate that specific assignment. So let's begin the review of Signorie by covering a couple positive points. The first of these relates to the dice pit mechanism, whereby you sometimes want really high value dice because it's cheaper, because you don't have to spend as much money to put them on your board, as well as maybe you have some helpers down such that those higher numbers are going to make you do more stuff on the board, like push your people up farther on those political tracks. But on the reverse side, you are always trying to get underneath the threshold of pips so that you can get that bonus action. So getting low value dice is also really important, and I just love the decision that that gives you while you're playing the game. I think it's important for a dice game to be good to make sure that all dice rolls can be good in different situations. And I think this game does a good job of that, because you will find yourself in a situation where you are trying to figure out, do I want to just blow through that threshold and just not get that bonus action, but do a whole bunch of other things? Like, is it going to be worth it to me to do that? Or do I stay under the threshold, but I'm going to have less money for the next turn? There's a whole bunch of things you can think about based off of just which die you pick. I mean, it's very simple. Take one die, put it on your board each turn, but that definitely differentiates out into a bunch of different options, and just looking at the dice immediately, you're not going to say, oh, that's a good or a bad roll. You're just going to say, oh, that's an interesting roll. Positive number 2 relates to the balance between a slower engine building strategy, which is like putting lots of helpers down on your sheet, versus a fast victory point cash out engine where you're just pushing people up the political tracks and marrying people off as quickly as you can and not really focusing on getting those helpers down. And I've noticed that the scores can be pretty comparable. It's like on one they shoot ahead and they just go at same speed really quickly, and the other one ramps up, and by the end of the game it seems like they're pretty comparable, and I like seeing that kind of thing. For me, I really prefer engine-based gameplay. So when I've played it, I've usually spent a lot of effort putting tons of these helpers down so that on future actions I'm going to get to do even more stuff. But I played a game where I went heavy on that. I had like 5 or 6 more helpers than my opponent, who just went blitzing on just getting points as fast as they could. And at the end of the game, I think the difference in our points was less than 10, which is quite a bit considering the scores I think were in the 200s, definitely in the high 100s. So there's a lot of victory points in this game. And I like seeing the balance between these 2 strategies you can take. So now let's shift into a couple of neutral points, and the first of these relates once again to that helper board in front of you. Now, I really love the idea behind this system where you can invest this turn into making a future action better with a bonus action, and every time you hit that in the future, you're going to get that bonus action. And there's a great variety of them. You could do extra marriage actions, you could just get victory points. Depending on the pit value of the activation, you can get a bunch of the political or military advancements happening. And these are all fun and they're interesting things you can do. My problem is that it's the same exact set every time you play for every player around the table. And maybe I've been a little spoiled with many games having asymmetry or modularity when it comes to this kind of thing, but when I see that and I play the game multiple times, I already feel like it's getting not necessarily stale, but I feel like I'm going to do a similar thing every single time I play it if I am playing to win. And that's because some of these just feel better than others, especially early game rather than late game. So I have a hard time seeing myself not just continuing to do pretty much the same pattern of helpers on that player sheet. Now, if I'm doing a heavy helper strategy, I will obviously branch out more into different of the options. But if I'm trying to do a quick racing style strategy, man, I think I'm going to be hitting the same 3 or 4 every single game because they just feel really good. And I wish something had been done to mix it up a little bit, like with some modularity or with some asymmetry or something, so that it doesn't feel like I'm being presented with the same puzzle every single time I sit down. And because I usually in those situations solve the puzzle in a very similar way each time, and I want there to be more reason to break out and try different things than just doing it for novelty's sake. My second neutral point relates to the official variants that come in the game. Now, this is not new for this game. Many games have variants that you can play with that are printed like in the back of the rulebook. This one has them printed on a separate piece of paper that was kind of on top of the stack of stuff when you first open up the game. And they are pretty significant variants. Like one of them, you just remove an entire turn from the game, make it a 6-turn game instead of 7. For another one, you have an entire mechanism be the first come, first serve. Like once somebody does it, nobody else can get to it. There's another one that says once a city fills up, you can still put people in there to get points, even though you don't get tokens. And the vibe of these variants is they feel like band-aids as opposed to actual variants that are going to make this one gameplay feel better than that gameplay. It doesn't feel like it's helping replayability. It feels like it's fixing issues that have cropped up in the game. And from what I've seen, it does seem like most people prefer to use most of these variants. And when I've played it, it seems like 6 turns is the right number of turns as opposed to 7. And it seems like, yeah, those cities can fill up. You want an official situation where you could just pull your people out and get points for them. Like that shouldn't be a variant. It feels odd. Like, why wasn't this stuff caught in playtesting, and why didn't they just not make these variants, just make these official, and then maybe even have like a long game variant to do the extra turn, or a mean game variant so that once a city's full, you can't get into there anymore. Because it feels like those are much more restrictive and much more kind of like hardcore and not interesting, honestly, to me. That just, I don't understand that. So I'm not going to point fingers and say it wasn't developed enough. I just don't get why these variants were not just straight up the main rules that are supposed to be in the game as it shipped. Let's now discuss a couple negative points, and the first of these is pretty simple. Analysis paralysis is a problem for me and some of the people I play with for this game. Now, the idea of analysis paralysis is just that you have so many options, so many things to think about, that you freeze up and you don't make a decision, or it just takes you way too long to make a decision. And I've seen playing this game that, especially once you get to like the mid and late game, things can really start to lock up because there are so many things to think about. And I do enjoy having lots of things to think about, and the things you're thinking about are quite interesting. But it really can get to the point where you are doing all this math in your head for this die versus this die versus that die, and what order should you do them, and if you don't do them in this order and somebody takes that die, well, how's that going to affect your situation? Are you going to have enough money? Well, let's see. Let's undo that, and let's see if we do this and this. Oh, but remember, you're going to get money for this and this, and everybody's doing this. But it seems like certain people are doing it more than others, and even when everybody is in an analysis paralysis situation, it's going to make the game go pretty long. It means that you're oftentimes thinking when other people are thinking, which is not the worst thing in the world, but this game feels longer than it should have been. And I think a big part of that is because of all this little math that you have to constantly be doing. And it's really important to think about it, though, because I have found myself in situations in this game where I am one money shy of getting a whole bunch of points. Like, I think I have a plan, I'm doing it all out, and I'm trying to make it all work, and then something happens, or I just made a tiny little math mistake. I'm one money shy, and now it all goes to pot. I can't do any of that stuff, and honestly, I feel kind of bummed in that situation. So not only is there this analysis paralysis, but even after doing all that and finally figuring out what you're going to do, it's pretty common for me anyway to still do it somewhat wrong and not be entirely satisfied with the outcome. And negative number 2 relates to the aesthetic appeal of the game while you're playing it. It's just a very bland looking game. It doesn't pop with any color. It's got a bland map of Italy. You have all these house crests which look kind of cool, but again, don't really pop off. The board itself is not very inspiring to look at. This is not going to be the kind of game where people walk by and are instantly intrigued by what you're doing based off of the table presence of it. And I feel like these are problems. Like, you want to be visually stimulated while you're being intellectually stimulated. And this game is just not bringing that in. It's like these political tracks are just kind of a basic grid with a couple little icons along the top. There's so many spots where this game could have really tried to pull me in more. And also, from a thematic perspective, it doesn't really help make me feel like I am a Signorie. I'm at the head of this house, wheeling and dealing with other houses and doing all this stuff. It really just feels like a math optimization game with these dice. As you're crunching all these numbers, you don't feel any political swings, you don't feel any power shifts. It's just a bunch of addition on a bland, mostly brown map, which is a issue for me. Normally, I'm okay with dry Euros and bland looking appearances, but for some reason, this one, it just doesn't do it for me. I found the replayability for Signorie to be below average for me, and that is all about the variance of setup and how little variance there actually is. Each player board has a different set of house crests that you're trying to get on the right-hand side, but that differing set does not really make one play feel different from another. It just means that you and your opponents won't be vying directly as much for the same exact crests out on the Italy field. So it won't be, one person's gonna go over here, one person will go over there, kind of by definition because of our asymmetric matching sets. But the helper set, like all the options you can do to put your helpers down, it's the same for every player, and it's the same every time you play the game. And that is a weakness, I think, in a replayability perspective. Of course, if you really love the game and you love how all this stuff works and you don't mind being presented with pretty much the same exact puzzle every time you sit down, then that's fine. You're probably going to have a lot of legs with this game. But for me, I like more variance in setup and more things that push me in different strategies beyond me just being bored with one strategy and wanting to try another. So in all these respects, I think Signorie falls a little short. So let's discuss the player counts for Signorie. It is a 2 to 4 player game, and I play the 2 and 3 player game. And the reason I haven't played a 4 player game is because I don't think I want to. It's just going to be way too long. Like, I already have analysis paralysis problems with the game at 3 players. Having a 4th player is not going to make the game particularly better. I mean, it's one more die that's going to get rolled, and so that's even more options for you to crunch through when you're trying to figure out what you're going to do with your turn. In addition to the fact that's one more turn, one more player, you're going to have to wait for them to take their turn, and it unlocks one city in the overall Italy map, which doesn't really affect things at all, in my opinion. So I don't see why I would want to play 4-player. I'm sure it works. I just think it's going to be far too long for what it is. Even, I think 3-player is going to be best because you do want some variety of the dice that are rolled. When the 2-player game I played, it somewhat often we would roll doubles on the dice in those different sections, so suddenly the decisions there aren't really there. It's like if you want a purple die, it's going to be a 3 or a 3 on this turn. And to a certain degree, that actually helped out with the analysis paralysis because it was one less thing to crunch. You're like, okay, well, if I want that action, it's going to cost that much, done. But in the 3-player game, having those 3 dice, it's much less likely that you're going to roll 3 of the same die, and having options with the pips on all those colors is a good thing. So I think 3 is best, 2 worked okay, and 4, I haven't played it, but I don't think I'd recommend it. In conclusion, I found Signorie to be a satisfying gaming experience, but I don't know how many more times I'm actually going to play it, if at all. I think one of my best friends summed it up well. He said, "I'm really glad I played this game, and I don't think I ever want to play it again." And the reason for that was, it's got great puzzles. It's got great thinky things. You're trying to figure out the pips. I love dice pool drafting games in general. It's great decisions to be made about which dice do you take now and which ones do you think you can wait on. Will other people take them, or will I get to take it on next turn because it really is better for me to take that on the next turn after I do this? That's great stuff, and that is in this game. But this game is so mathy with its different options, and it has so many different options that the analysis paralysis really slows it down. It kind of puts the brakes on excitement and fun, all the while still providing a satisfying intellectual experience. And I think there's a lot of good stuff in this game. I think the helper board is really great, but from a modularity, replayability perspective, I need a little more than what this game has given me in order to keep playing it as the same game every single time you sit down. Like, there are some games that I really like that have no modularity or variance, but this one, it felt a little bit too much like hard work. It was a little bit too long, and ultimately, I might not play it again. I am glad I've played it. I'm glad I was able to introduce it to a couple of my friends. I'm glad I'm able to make a video review for it, and I think for many people, they are going to love this game. They're going to love the humongous tree of decisions that are there. Maybe they suffer from analysis paralysis less than I do, or they tolerate it a lot better than I do. So there is definitely probably a subset of people who are really going to love this game, but for me, I just liked it, and that's not quite good enough. If you'd like to see more in-depth board game reviews like this one, as well as full game playthroughs and vlogs, please subscribe to my channel. Also, you can directly support the channel at patreon.com/JonGetsGames. Thanks for watching.